The pod shuddered like a dying beast as it tore through the upper atmosphere, metal skin glowing red-hot from re-entry. Captain Jack Maddox barely flinched. Strapped in, helmet sealed, boots locked, he watched the altitude countdown tick past 30,000 feet with all the enthusiasm of a man waiting in line for coffee. A distorted voice crackled in his comms. "Elsie looks hot. Karnik's anti-air pinging the drop corridor. Could be a short ride, boys." "Short's fine," Maddox replied calmly. "Means less time to get bored." Inside his pod, the lights flickered, then turned crimson. Impact window. 10 seconds. He glanced at the heads-up display. His squad was still intact. 6 green dots. 6 lunatics. Americans, all of them. Veterans of a dozen wars the rest of the galaxy liked to pretend didn't exist. Officially, they were Coalition Auxiliary Unit 7. Unofficially, they were called the Hellhounds. Briggs, the walking tank with a flamethrower addiction, chuckled over the comms. "I brought marshmallows this time. Hope these Karnik's bastards like barbecue." Tex, their sniper, dry as dust, muttered, "You're the only person I know who gets nostalgic about arson." The pod slammed into the ground like a fist from the heavens, crushing 2 enemy scouts before they could scream. Maddox's harness released. He stood, boots crunching alien bones under the hatch. Outside, the battlefield was a mess. Purple-skinned Karniks swarmed like hornets, energy bolts slicing through the air. The humans had landed in the middle of a forward garrison, exactly where the Tribunal wanted them. Maddox stepped out into chaos without a second thought. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. The Hellhounds moved like muscle memory. Briggs fired a wall of flame that turned the nearest trench into an open casket. Doc slid across gravel and jabbed a needle into Maddox's arm. Adrenaline surge. Heart rate spiked, vision sharpened. "Why do you always poke me first?" Maddox asked. "You're the only one dumb enough to walk into a war zone like it's a shopping trip." Karnik soldiers, towering reptilian bipeds, charged with shock staffs and heavy carbines. One lunged. Maddox ducked, rolled under the sweep, and slammed a knife into its gut, twisting until he felt the snap of internal plating. Blood sprayed across his visor. They expected humans to panic. That was the plan. Throw them into a meat grinder, watch them crack, record the breakdown. Instead, Maddox was laughing. He turned toward the nearest surveillance drone hovering overhead, casually raised a middle finger, and blew it a kiss. "Smile, Tribunal." A Karnik's officer bellowed commands in their guttural dialect. Tex dropped him with a headshot before he finished the second syllable. 3 o'clock, Tex called out. 10 more. Looks like they're setting up mortar nests. Not anymore, Briggs rumbled, already moving. The Tribunal was watching. High in orbit, seated in their sterilized halls, alien observers logged every twitch and tactic. Humans were being tested, poked, prodded, provoked. The Coalition wanted to know the limits of their Earth-born assets. How far they could be pushed. How much blood they'd spill before they broke. And here they were, spilling blood just fine. Just not theirs. Maddox activated his comms and patched into the open Tribunal channel. He knew they were listening. "This your idea of a stress test?" he said, wiping gore from his visor. "Because I've seen worse traffic in Houston." He switched off before the stunned silence on their end could respond. Enemy fire intensified. The Karniks were regrouping. Smart. Maddox respected that. But it was too late. The Hellhounds had the momentum. They fought with rhythm, with purpose, not because they were ordered to, but because this was what they did. What they were made for. The humans advanced. Trench by trench, bunker by bunker. Explosions rocked the ridge. Dust and alien screams filled the air. Doc dragged a wounded enemy behind cover, not to treat him, but to use his body as bait for the next wave. Maddox watched it all unfold like a conductor admiring his orchestra. Controlled violence. Precision chaos. By the time the smoke cleared, the garrison was silent. Corpses littered the dirt. Craters steamed. The few surviving Karniks had fled. Maddox pulled off his helmet and let the sulfur-thick air hit his face. He lit a cigar with a plasma cartridge and took a slow drag. The drone, one of the few that hadn't been shot down, floated above him. He stared into its lens. "I know you're up there," he said, blowing smoke toward the camera. "You send us down to die. To make a point. To study us. Treat us like animals in a pit. Guess what? You just found out what happens when the animals bring knives." The squad regrouped. No fatalities. A few injuries, nothing serious. Briggs had a plasma burn. Doc wrapped it with duct tape. Tex raised a brow. "So, boss. Think we passed their little test?" Maddox smiled, eyes cold. "Test? This was a warm-up." They moved out, leaving behind the wreckage of what the Tribunal had once called an acceptable loss. In orbit, behind layers of bureaucracy and arrogance, High Arbiter Zelraxa leaned forward in stunned silence as the footage replayed. Again and again. The humans didn't just survive, they dismantled the scenario entirely. Like they knew it was coming. He didn't understand it yet. Not fully. But the question had already begun forming in his mind. What have we unleashed? High Arbiter Zelraxa stood frozen, translucent digits hovering over the replay console. The footage of the humans' assault looped on the central display, 6 Terran soldiers dismantling a Karnix garrison like it was sport. Maddox's voice echoed through the chamber again. "You just found out what happens when the animals bring knives." Silence wrapped the Tribunal's high chamber, a domed hall of shimmering crystal and blue mist. Delegates from 25 advanced species watched in dismay. Some were whispering in panic. Others stared, unwilling to accept what they'd just witnessed. Zelraxa turned toward the Tribunal's head xenopsychologist, a wide-eyed, feathered Lurexi named Dr. Venner. "You assured us humans could be controlled. That aggression was a symptom, not a system." Venner twitched. "They were supposed to panic. Or at least hesitate. They didn't just react, they dominated." "Why?" Venner hesitated. "Because they're not fighting to win a battle. They fight like they're proving a point." Zelraxa hissed, frustrated. "To whom?" "Everyone," said a deep voice near the chamber entrance. Commander Razkul of the Brassian Guard, one of the few warrior species still active in combat, stepped forward. His armor clinked softly with each step. "You built your entire policy on data. But data doesn't understand rage. History does." Zelraxa narrowed his gaze. "Explain." Razkul raised a claw and activated a hollow panel. Images of Earth flickered into the air, World War footage, nuclear mushroom clouds, insurgency skirmishes, city riots, drone strikes in deserts, urban combat in frozen wastelands. "You saw numbers. I saw legacy," Razkul said. "Humans don't need leadership to kill. They only need purpose. You gave them that when you lied about their mission." Zelraxa dismissed the images. "We tested their effectiveness. Nothing more." "No," Razkul said flatly. "You gave apex predators permission to hunt." Back on Karzal 9, Maddox leaned against the fractured hull of a downed Karnix walker, sipping water from his rebreather line. His HUD glowed with encrypted signals, Tribunal transmissions bouncing off the outer satellites. The encryption was thick. He cracked it in 8 minutes. The squad gathered around a portable relay unit, eyes narrowing as they listened to the intercepted audio. "Observe behavioral breakdown under extreme stress. Apply systemic attrition. Track psychological fracture point." Tex's brow furrowed. "They send us to die. On purpose." "No," Briggs growled. "Worse. They wanted to watch us die." Doc spat in the dirt. "They're not allies. They're spectators." Maddox closed the file. "That's their first mistake." "What's the second?" asked Briggs. Maddox stood up, looking toward the ridge where the next Karnix settlement waited. "Thinking we wouldn't find out." He didn't say more. Didn't need to. They moved out, silent and angry. The kind of quiet that preceded storms. Back in orbit, a secondary meeting had been called, smaller, tighter, without press or external observers. Only decision-makers remained. We either rein them in, Zelraxa said, or risk destabilizing everything we've built. A gray-skinned diplomat from the Veari Confederation cleared his throat. You misunderstand what you've created. You didn't train them. You didn't guide them. You gave them targets and turned them loose. Containment is still possible, Zelraxa insisted. We monitor, limit deployment, reduce exposure. The room scoffed. Razkul spoke again. You can't cage something that doesn't recognize a leash. Vena added reluctantly. The more they fight, the more they evolve. Emotionally. Strategically. You set out to mold a weapon, but forgot something critical. Humans aren't a species that obeys when betrayed. They rebel. Then we suppress them now. How? Razkul asked. They've already started listening to our comms. They knew they were being watched and performed. That's not a tactical response, that's theater. For whom, we don't know yet. Zelraxa turned toward his private aide, a young data analyst with pale green skin and trembling hands. Do we have a psychological profile on Captain Maddox? The analyst swallowed hard. Yes, sir, it's incomplete. He refused direct profiling and altered most of the standard evaluations. According to one report, he submitted a photograph of a dog flipping off the camera as his response to empathy testing. The room went still. Zelraxa's voice grew quieter. So we don't even know what motivates him? Only patterns, sir. And the patterns say this: every time he's cornered, he doesn't just survive. He adapts. Quickly. Vena muttered. We were supposed to monitor a threat. Instead, we gave it fuel. On the ground, Maddox's squad reached a ridge overlooking a fortified Karnix relay base. It wasn't on their original objectives list, which made it interesting. Tex adjusted his scope. This one's got double the guards. Bet it's a listening post. Briggs loaded an explosive satchel. I say we turn it into a fireworks show. Maddox held up a hand. No. We're going to take it intact. Doc blinked. Why? So we can talk back. An hour later, the squad stormed the facility. It was brutal and fast. Maddox disabled the core guards with precision takedowns, Doc used flash charges to disorient, and Tex cleaned up the towers with sniper shots before alarms could go out. Once inside, Maddox connected his armor's neural interface to the terminal. The system fought back. Firewalls twisted like serpents. Maddox grinned and whispered, You forget, boys, we invented the internet during wars. 17 minutes later, the human squad stood inside a fully operational Karnix comm tower. Maddox sent a single, untraceable burst signal to the Tribunal's classified diplomatic channel. You tried to cage the predators. Bad idea. We're off the leash now. He ended the signal. Tex stared. Won't that just piss them off? Maddox holstered his rifle. Good. Angry prey makes mistakes. They set demolition charges on the secondary arrays, disabled only the broadcasting capacity, then left the tower standing, useless and glaring. As the squad marched deeper into alien territory, Maddox glanced at the night sky. They wanted a field report. He'd give them something better. A lesson. In blood. The jungle on Karzal 9 wasn't green. It pulsed with violet vines and glowing amber spores, a tangled nightmare that hummed with unseen life. Maddox hated it immediately. Not because it was alien, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. Don't like this, Briggs muttered, trudging behind him. His boots left deep impressions in the spongy moss. I feel like I'm walking through someone's lungs. It's a trap, Tex said. That's not a theory. That's a guarantee. Maddox raised his hand. The squad froze instantly. A flicker of movement, 6 meters ahead. High in the canopy. Then another. Shadows, not natural ones. Camouflage shimmer tech barely visible. Karnix recon scouts. Too light-footed to be foot soldiers. Probably linked to the comm towers. Observers. They're watching us, Doc whispered. They're always watching, Maddox replied, voice low. But now we know how to watch back. He pulled a fiber dart from his vest and fired it into the canopy. It zipped silently, embedding into one of the observers' cloaks. The feed synced to Maddox's helmet. "Smile, boys," he said. "We've got eyes on their eyes." The uplink showed a dozen Karnix patrols in the jungle ahead, spaced out but moving in a spiral pattern, closing in on their position. Standard encirclement, but something about the timing was off. Too slow. Measured. Like they were herding instead of hunting. Tex whistled. "Think they want to capture us?" "No," Maddox muttered. "They want to see what we do when we're cornered." Briggs cracked his knuckles. "Let's show 'em." Maddox knelt beside a thick root and began planting charges, directional mines set to spray upward. "We don't run. We make a kill box. Turn their observation into a funeral." In 10 minutes, the humans had transformed the clearing into a death trap. Mines, tripwires, and improvised flame nozzles built from broken alien canisters. It was a hunter's snare, except the prey would be armed and confused. Then they waited. The first movement came from the east. A low chittering sound, barely audible, followed by a single pulse rifle blast. A warning shot. Then the jungle exploded into chaos. Karnix scouts burst from the foliage, silent, quick, ruthless. But not ruthless enough. The lead scout triggered a tripwire. A burst of fire caught him mid-air, reducing him to a flaming heap. The rest froze, too late. The mines detonated in a chain reaction. Shrapnel filled the air. Trees split. Purple blood splashed the underbrush. Tex picked off the stragglers one by one, his rifle scope synced to the drone feed Maddox had hijacked. It was like they were cheating at a game the aliens didn't know had rules. Doc dragged a wounded Karnix away from the carnage and slammed him against a tree. "Start talking." The alien snarled something in its native clicks. Maddox stepped in and jammed a plasma torch an inch from its eye. "We know you're not hunting. You're recording." "Why?" The Karnix bared its fangs. "You're being measured." "By who?" Silence. Maddox didn't flinch. "Wrong answer." Doc leaned close. "They're not interrogating us anymore. We're the experiment. See how we adapt. How we react. They want to chart the limits of human rage. They'll need a bigger graph." Tex called from above. A low rumble shook the jungle floor. Maddox dropped the torch. "That's not thunder." Out of the haze, a bipedal mech came stomping through the brush. Karnix engineering, heavily modified. 10 meters tall, armed with rotary cannons and plasma emitters. A mobile weapons lab. Probably unmanned. Perfect for remote observation. "They sent a walking fortress to record us?" Briggs said. "No," Maddox said, staring. "To provoke us." Briggs cracked his neck. "I'm feeling provoked." "Good." The humans scattered. Maddox ran straight for the mech, ducking plasma bursts that incinerated trees behind him. He slid beneath its legs, slapped a magnetic mine onto its knee joint, and rolled away just as it exploded, sending the leg crumpling sideways. The machine staggered but didn't fall. Briggs charged in from the left, hurling a canister filled with thermite jelly. The sticky compound clung to the armor and burned white-hot. The mech fired blindly, hitting nothing. Tex radioed in. "Back panel's thin. I've got a shot if you get it to turn." Maddox shouted. "Make it mad!" Briggs didn't hesitate. He ran up and smacked the side of the mech with the flat of his gun. The mech turned. Tex took the shot. A round slammed into the rear coolant panel. The system failed instantly. Steam burst from its core. Maddox sprinted up the side, using the outer armor as a ladder, and jammed a shock grenade into the exposed joint. It detonated internally. The mech froze, shook, and dropped to its knees. Then the self-destruct sequence activated. Maddox leapt off and hit the dirt as the mech went nuclear, blasting a crater into the jungle and turning the surrounding vegetation into ash. Silence returned. Charred debris rained down like burning snow. Maddox stood, brushing soot off his armor. That got their attention. Briggs surveyed the smoldering wreck. Still think we're the ones being tested? No, Maddox said, walking toward the center of the blast zone. Now we're the answer to someone else's question. He activated his comm and broadcast on an open coalition channel. This is Captain Maddox. Hellhound unit still operational. Still advancing. And still not impressed. He clicked off. Above the planet, several surveillance ships received the message. Across coalition networks, the footage of the mech's destruction uploaded itself, along with the audio log Maddox had pre-recorded. Let them watch. Let them learn. But they wouldn't understand until it was too late. Because no one tests apex predators and walks away untouched. The Karnak's capital didn't look like a city. It looked like a wound in the planet, black towers grown from volcanic rock, spires coiled like bone, and energy grids pulsing beneath a translucent dome that covered it all like a scarred bubble. That dome was meant to repel orbital strikes and planetary sieges. Maddox wasn't planning either. His team stood at the edge of a canyon overlooking the structure, half covered in ash from the mech explosion. Scans flickered on their visors, showing weak spots along the dome's perimeter, maintenance tunnels, barely protected. The kind of entrance no orbital commander would notice. Maddox wasn't an orbital commander. Tex looked through his scope and exhaled slowly. That dome's powered by 4 relays, north and west look weakest. The city's prepped for ships. Not people. They didn't expect us to walk here. They're about to learn, Maddox said, checking the charge on his rifle. We're going through the tunnels. Doc blinked. You want us to sneak into the capital of the Karnak's dominion? Not sneak. Walk in like we belong. Briggs grinned. They'll never see that coming. The maintenance shaft was barely 2 meters wide, lined with hissing steam pipes and old alloy plating. No guards. Just drones, routine inspection bots, built to ignore organic life under a certain mass. Maddox disabled 3 with nothing but a combat knife and a coil of fiber wire. They reached the inner grid an hour later, emerging into a lower district full of logistics staff, technicians, and civilian engineers. None of them expected humans. That became clear when the first scream rang out. Too late now, Tex muttered, raising his weapon. No, Maddox said, pushing it down. Let them scream. He pulled his helmet off and stepped forward. Karnak's civilians scattered, fleeing between angular buildings as alarms lit up the skyline. Maddox kept walking. Slow. Unbothered. The others followed, visors down, weapons out, but held low. Controlled. Measured. That, more than the weapons, was what terrified the locals. A military escort approached, 6 soldiers in black armor. Their commander shouted in their native tongue. Maddox didn't translate. Instead, he pulled a beacon from his belt and triggered it. The sky above cracked with thunder. Not weather, dropships. Coalition ships. But not just any. American-marked vessels. Unauthorized, unsanctioned, and now very, very visible. The Tribunal would be watching, helpless. Maddox stepped forward. You wanted apex predators. You're about to see how they take a capital. The commander hesitated. Then aimed. Bad move. Tex shot him through the visor before his finger reached the trigger. The streets turned red. Briggs stormed a weapons depot and dragged out plasma canisters, planting them at intersections. Doc hijacked the emergency broadcast system and played audio from the jungle ambush, the sound of Karnak's dying, looped over classical Earth music. Chaos spread. By the time the main Karnak's military unit arrived, the lower district was already collapsing. Fire bloomed across rooftops. Automated defenses shut down. Tex had fed the system a virus using a stolen drone access key. Inside the central tower, Karnak's command scrambled. Hollow channels lit up with garbled screams. Dozens of voices demanded answers. The capital had never been breached. Not in 4 centuries. Now 6 humans were carving their names into the walls. Maddox led the final push himself, planting breaching charges at the base of the command spire. The door burst open. His squad flowed inside like a shadow flood. They reached the command bridge in under 6 minutes. No one inside had time to react. The Karnak's warlord, 12 feet tall, plated in ceremonial armor, roared and charged Maddox with a vibroaxe the size of a truck bumper. Maddox didn't flinch. He sidestepped, caught the inside of the swing, jammed a grenade under the warlord's shoulder plate, and kicked him backward. The explosion was small. The impact wasn't. Purple gore splattered the polished obsidian wall behind the throne. The room went silent. Maddox climbed the steps, blood on his boots, and turned toward the command dais. He activated the Karnak's holonet transmitter. The feed went live across systems. Not just the Dominion, but the Coalition. Every channel. Every Tribunal comm frequency. They all saw him. Helmet off, eyes hard. "This is Captain Jack Maddox of Earth. Coalition Auxiliary? No. That's done. You didn't hire soldiers. You opened the cage and poked the wrong animal." He leaned forward, voice low but clear. "You tested us. We answered. Now here's our question. What do you do when the predators organize?" He dropped the warlord's crest to the floor. Behind him, Tex held up a detonator. The charges planted around the district blinked in sequence. One by one, the buildings below crumbled. Controlled. Precise. Surgical destruction. The message wasn't just violence. It was intelligence behind violence. That's what unsettled them the most. Up in orbit, the Tribunal feed went black. Zelraxa stood from his chair slowly, jaw locked, pulse spiking. "They're not animals," he said, voice thin. "No," said Venner from the shadows. "They're strategists with a vendetta. And we just gave them a reason to act on it." Zelraxa turned to his aides. "Begin emergency war protocols. Flag all Earthborn assets for monitoring and suppression. Effective immediately." One aide, younger than the others, hesitated. "Suppression, sir?" Zelraxa snapped. "Yes." The aide blinked. "What if they don't allow it?" Zelraxa didn't answer. Down on the planet, Maddox stood atop the broken dais, flame and smoke curling behind him, as his squad watched the city choke on its own defenses. No one would misunderstand again. They were not allies. They were a warning. The Tribunal's command tower on Urax Prime stood like a blade driven into the heart of the galactic core, pristine, towering, flawless. On the outside. Inside, it was unraveling. Zelraxa paced the chamber, hands twitching behind his back, breathing shallower than usual. The footage was still on every major network. Maddox standing over a slain Karnak's warlord, firestorm raging behind him, voice calm and full of contempt. The war had changed, and everyone watching knew it. Some were terrified. Others, inspired. "They broadcast the destruction of a sovereign capital," he hissed. "As a performance." Venner adjusted his translator collar, voice strained. "Public sentiment across 12 systems is shifting. Several frontier worlds have already declared sympathy with Earthborn forces. Some are flying human flags. They're glorifying violence." Zelraxa snapped. "No," said Razkul, arms crossed at the far end of the room. "They're glorifying defiance. There's a difference." Zelraxa turned to the center display. Dozens of tactical readouts blinked in angry red. Human activity was surging. Encrypted messages were bouncing through coalition channels like sparks across dry grass. Entire fleets had gone dark. Others were repositioning without orders. The humans weren't just rogue. They were mobilizing. "They're not even pretending to follow anymore," Venner said, voice low. "We lost control the moment we tested them like beasts." "They are beasts," Zelraxa muttered. "We just failed to muzzle them in time." "No," Razkul said. "You failed to recognize what they are." Zelraxa stared at him. "Apex." Maddox stood on the deck of the Achilles, his squad behind him, the stars ahead. The bridge was silent, save for the distant hum of redirected power. Coalition protocols had been severed. They weren't auxiliaries anymore. Not mercenaries. Not contractors. No chain of command. No leash. Just soldiers with unfinished business. Tex leaned over a console. Interceptors on the edge of the system. Tribunal flag. 1 dreadnought. 2 recon-class escorts. Briggs didn't even flinch. Think they're here to say sorry? No, Maddox said. They're here to make a deal. The calm buzzed. A voice filtered through, measured, polished, artificial. This is Tribunal Command Vessel High Clarity. Stand down. You are in violation of multiple interstellar compacts. Disarm, return all property, and prepare for containment. Maddox smiled, slow and cold. He stepped forward and tapped the mic. You poked the cage. You measured our instincts. You counted our scars like notches on a ruler. And now you want us to act civil? He paused. You set the rules. You broke them first. We just stopped pretending to play. Silence followed. Then the tribunal responded. Humanity is now under formal investigation for destabilization, insurrection, and acts of warfare against sovereign states. Any refusal to comply will result in military engagement. Maddox's eyes narrowed. Good. Then let me clarify something. He gestured to Doc, who patched the open frequency into the ship's audiovisual feed, broadcasting the next words across every system where a human soldier still breathed. You didn't just pick a fight with humanity, Maddox said. You picked a fight with the part of us that remembers every time someone tried to chain us. And every time, we broke free. Not because we wanted to be feared, but because you left us no choice. He leaned closer to the mic. You called us predators. You had no idea what that meant. Briggs keyed in coordinates. The Achilles drives lit up. Tex muttered. They're trying to scramble targeting. Want me to return fire? No, Maddox said. Let them see what real fear feels like. The ship surged forward, not toward the tribunal vessels, but through them. Engines flaring, it passed between the dreadnought and the escorts like a knife through silk. Not a shot fired. The tribunal didn't react. Not fast enough. Doc let out a breath. They're hesitating. Then we've already won. Across the galaxy, unrest spread like wildfire. On mining colonies where Earth-born laborers had once bowed to alien overseers, flags were lowered, new ones raised. In combat sectors where human mercenaries once followed coalition orders, those orders were now being questioned. On border worlds once skeptical of human aggression, calls began, requests for alliance. For protection. Because the galaxy finally understood, humans didn't seek war. They ended it. Back on Urax Prime, Zelraxa stood before a private comm station, expression unreadable. The monitor flashed. A direct transmission from the Achilles. He opened it. Maddox appeared, helmet under one arm, blood still drying on his collar. You wanted monsters, Arbiter. You needed someone to fight your wars, spill your enemy's blood, so your hands stayed clean. You built us up. Now you're afraid of what you see. Zelraxa said nothing. Maddox continued. But here's the part you missed. We weren't your creation. We warned you what we were. You just didn't listen. He stepped closer to the feed. Predators don't follow. They hunt. And you just made yourself prey. The transmission cut. Zelraxa stood in silence as the feed went dark, replaced by his own reflection. He looked old. Small. A predator who'd forgotten what it felt like to be hunted. On the bridge of the Achilles, Maddox lit a cigar and stared into the stars. Tex looked at him sideways. So, what now? War? No, Maddox said, smoke curling from his lips. War's already here. Doc folded his arms. And peace? Maddox exhaled. Peace comes after. Briggs loaded another clip into his rifle. After what? Maddox stared forward. After we remind the galaxy why you never give humans a reason to fight.